The paper crinkled beneath Naomi as she shifted on the examination table, the thin gown doing little to ward off the chill of the air-conditioned room. She'd scheduled this appointment on impulse, something she couldn't quite explain. For months she'd felt off, exhausted, foggy-minded. Julian always assured her it was stress, that the supplements he prescribed would help, but nothing changed. Dr. Peterson entered with a warm smile, his gray hair and gentle demeanor immediately putting her at ease. "Mrs. Harrison, good to meet you. I see this is your first visit to our practice." "Yes," Naomi replied. "I just felt like I needed a second opinion. No offense to my regular doctor. None taken. That's what we're here for." He washed his hands thoroughly, then began reviewing her intake forms. His brow furrowed slightly. "I see you've been having irregular cycles, fatigue, mood changes. How long has this been going on?" "About 3 years? Maybe longer. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when it started." Dr. Peterson nodded, making notes. "And who has been managing your gynecological care during this time?" "My husband, actually. He's a gynecologist too. Dr. Julian Harrison. Do you know him?" The pen in Dr. Peterson's hand paused mid-stroke. His expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral in a way that made Naomi's stomach tighten. "I see. And what treatments has he prescribed?" Naomi listed the various supplements and hormone therapies Julian had her on, watching as Dr. Peterson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly with each medication she named. "Mrs. Harrison, I'd like to proceed with the examination now, if that's all right." The next 15 minutes felt like an eternity. Dr. Peterson was thorough, professional, but Naomi could sense tension radiating from him. When he finally stepped back and removed his gloves, his face was grave. "Mrs. Harrison, please get dressed and meet me in my office. We need to talk." Those words. The ones everyone fears hearing from a doctor. Naomi's hands trembled as she pulled on her clothes, her mind racing through possibilities. Cancer. Infertility. Something worse. Dr. Peterson's office was lined with diplomas and family photos. He gestured for her to sit, then settled behind his desk with a heavy sigh. "I'm going to be direct with you because I believe you deserve the truth. What I observed during your examination is deeply concerning. The medications you've been taking, the ones your husband prescribed, they shouldn't be used together. In fact, some of them directly contradict each other." Naomi's mouth went dry. "I don't understand. You're showing signs of prolonged hormone suppression. The tissue changes I'm seeing are consistent with someone who's been on aggressive fertility-blocking treatments. But you said you've been trying to conceive?" "Yes, for 2 years now. Julian said my body just needed time, that stress was probably—" "Mrs. Harrison." Dr. Peterson leaned forward, his eyes kind but serious. "The treatments you've been receiving would make pregnancy impossible. They're designed to prevent it." The room seemed to tilt. Naomi gripped the arms of her chair. "That can't be right. Julian wouldn't. Why would he do that?" "I can't answer that. But I can tell you this isn't an accident. The combination of medications you're on requires specific knowledge and intent. This doesn't happen by mistake." Naomi's breath came in short gasps. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of trusting Julian with everything, including her body, her health, her future. "What do I do?" "First, stop taking everything he's given you immediately. I'm going to run comprehensive tests, blood work, everything. I want to document your current condition thoroughly. And Mrs. Harrison?" He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "You may want to consider seeking legal counsel. What's been done to you, if my suspicions are correct, goes beyond medical malpractice." Naomi left the office in a daze, Dr. Peterson's words echoing in her mind. She sat in her car for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of the impossible. Julian loved her. Didn't he? They built a life together. He was successful, respected, devoted. Or so she'd thought. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "Dinner at 7? Thought we could try that new Italian place." She stared at the message, at the casual normalcy of it, and felt something crack inside her chest. The man she'd shared a bed with for 5 years had been poisoning her, deliberately keeping her sick, preventing the family they'd supposedly been trying to build together. Naomi's hands shook as she typed back, "Sure. See you then." She needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what other lies were hiding in her marriage. Because if Julian had been lying about this, what else had he been lying about? Naomi went through the motions of her day like a ghost haunting her own life. She taught her afternoon yoga class at the community center, smiling and adjusting poses while her mind spun in endless circles. Every interaction felt surreal, as if she were watching herself from outside her body. How many times had she swallowed those pills Julian prepared for her each morning? How many times had she thanked him for taking such good care of her health? By the time she returned home, the rage had started to simmer beneath the shock. She walked through their spacious townhouse with new eyes, seeing the life they'd built together as a beautiful facade hiding something rotten underneath. Julian had money. Old money from his family, supplemented by his thriving private practice. He'd never wanted her to work, insisted her yoga instruction was just a hobby. She thought it was sweet, protective. Now she wondered if it was control. Her phone rang. Dr. Peterson's office. "Mrs. Harrison, your blood work came back. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I'd like to discuss the results in person." "Is it bad?" Pause. "I think this conversation is better had face to face. How does 9 o'clock sound?" Naomi agreed, her stomach churning. She had 3 hours before Julian came home. 3 hours to act normal, to pretend everything was fine while her world crumbled. She made it through dinner, though the pasta tasted like cardboard. Julian talked about his day, complained about a difficult patient, poured them both wine. He was charming, attentive, everything he'd always been. Naomi studied his handsome features, his easy smile, and wondered how she'd missed the monster beneath. That night, she lay awake beside him, listening to him breathe, fighting the urge to scream. The next morning, Dr. Peterson's expression told her everything before he even spoke. "The tests confirm what I suspected. You've been on a combination of medications that would prevent conception and cause the symptoms you've been experiencing. Fatigue, mood swings, irregular cycles. All side effects of what you've been taking." "How long?" Naomi's voice was barely a whisper. "Based on the levels in your system and the tissue changes, I'd estimate at least 3 years. Possibly longer." 3 years. Naomi thought of all the times she'd blamed herself for not getting pregnant. All the times Julian had comforted her, told her to be patient, that it would happen when the time was right. "There's more," Dr. Peterson continued gently. "I found evidence of other interventions. Small procedures that would have been documented in your medical records if done properly. Things that could have been presented to you as routine but were actually designed to prevent fertility." Naomi's hands clenched in her lap. "Can you fix it? Can you reverse what he's done? Your body is remarkably resilient. Once the medications clear your system, your natural cycles should return. The procedures? We'll need more tests to determine if there's any permanent damage. But I'm cautiously optimistic that you can recover fully. And pregnancy? Possible. I can't make promises, but there's no reason to believe you can't conceive naturally once your body heals." Relief and fury warred inside her. She could recover. But Julian had stolen years from her. Years of her life, her health, her choices. "I need copies of everything," Naomi said, her voice steadier now. "Every test, every finding, all of it. Documented." Dr. Peterson nodded approvingly. "I've already prepared a complete file for you. And Mrs. Harrison, I've reported this to the medical board. They'll be conducting their own investigation into Dr. Harrison's practices." Naomi drove home with the thick medical file on her passenger seat. Evidence. Proof. But proof of what, exactly? That her husband was a monster? That her marriage was a lie? She needed more than medical records. She needed to understand why. What could possibly motivate someone to do this to the person they claimed to love? The answer, she suspected, was somewhere in their home. In Julian's private office, the one room he'd always insisted was his sanctuary, off limits even to her. Well, all bets were off now. Naomi waited until Julian left for his morning hospital rounds, then stood outside his office door. She'd respected this boundary for 5 years. Not anymore. The door was locked, but she knew where he kept the spare key, hidden in a hollowed-out book in the living room. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. Julian's office was immaculate. Expensive desk, leather chair, walls lined with medical journals and framed degrees. Naomi started with the desk drawers, finding nothing but ordinary office supplies and patient files. Then she noticed the bottom drawer had a separate lock. Smaller, newer than the others. Naomi searched the desk for a key, growing more frantic. Finally, she grabbed a letter opener and jimmied the lock, not caring any more about covering her tracks. The lock gave way with a soft click. Inside were folders. Lots of them. She pulled out the first one and felt her blood run cold. Her name was on the tab. Inside were medical records, but not the ones she'd ever seen. These documented every medication Julian had given her, every procedure, with clinical notes in his handwriting. Subject responding well to treatment. Fertility successfully suppressed. No pregnancy risk. Subject. Not wife. Not Naomi. Subject. Her hands shook as she opened another folder. Financial records. Bank statements showing regular payments to someone named Simone Cartwright. Thousands of dollars monthly for years. And beneath that, printouts of text messages. Can't wait to see you tonight. N is taking her yoga class until 8. The new hormone blocker is working perfectly. She suspects nothing. Once my inheritance clears, we can finally start our real life together. Just need to keep her stable a bit longer. Naomi's vision blurred with tears. Simone Cartwright. She knew that name. Julian's business partner at his private practice. The pharmaceutical representative who'd been to their home for dinner parties. Who'd smiled at Naomi and complimented her cooking. She'd been sleeping with Julian. Planning a future with him. While Naomi was being systematically poisoned in her own home. Naomi photographed everything with shaking hands. Every document, every text message, every damning piece of evidence. She forwarded the photos to her email, then to a cloud storage account Julian didn't know about. If he destroyed the originals, she'd still have proof. The folders painted a picture of calculated cruelty that went back nearly to the beginning of their marriage. Julian and Simone's affair had started 4 years ago at a medical conference. The text messages showed their relationship evolving from professional to personal, then to something darker. She's so trusting, Simone had written. Almost too easy. That's what I love about her, Julian had replied. No suspicion at all. Makes everything simpler. Naomi pressed her fist against her mouth to stifle a sob. She couldn't break down now. She needed to keep reading, keep documenting. There had to be more. Another folder contained financial projections. Julian was planning to sell his practice and invest in a pharmaceutical startup with Simone. The projected returns were substantial, enough to set them up for life. But the timeline kept getting pushed back. Need more capital, one note read. Family trust doesn't disperse until marriage hits 5-year mark. 8 months to go. 8 months. Their 5th anniversary was in 8 months. Naomi realized with sickening clarity that she'd been a financial investment as much as anything else. Julian needed to stay married to her long enough to access his trust fund, then he'd planned to leave her. The medical manipulation hadn't just been about preventing pregnancy. It had been about keeping her weak, compliant, unable to look too closely at their life together. She found another file that made her stomach turn. Medical records for other women. Patients of Julian's who'd reported unexplained fertility issues, hormone imbalances, the same symptoms Naomi had experienced. Notes in Julian's handwriting suggested he'd been experimenting on them too, testing which drug combinations were most effective. He wasn't just a bad husband. He was a predator with a medical degree. Naomi heard the garage door opening. Julian was home early. She quickly stuffed the folders back into the drawer, but there was no way to fix the broken lock. Her heart pounded as she heard his footsteps in the hallway. Naomi? You home? She stepped out of his office, closing the door behind her. Julian stood in the hallway, still in his white coat, holding takeout bags. Thought I'd surprise you with lunch, he said, smiling. Then his gaze dropped to her hands, to the photos she was still clutching. His expression shifted. What are those? Medical records, Naomi said, her voice surprisingly steady. Interesting reading. Julian's smile didn't waver, but something cold entered his eyes. Have you been in my office? Yes. That's private, Naomi. You had no right. No right. Her voice rose. You've been poisoning me for years and you're worried about privacy? He set down the takeout bags carefully, deliberately. I don't know what you think you found, but you're clearly confused. Have you been taking your medications? Sometimes missing doses can cause paranoia. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced. How many times had he done this before? I saw a new doctor, Naomi said. Dr. Peterson. He ran tests. Real tests. I know what you've been doing, Julian. I know about the fertility suppressants. The unnecessary procedures. All of it. Julian's mask finally slipped. His jaw clenched. You saw another doctor without telling me? I don't need your permission to seek medical care. I'm your husband. I'm a doctor. Who better to take care of you? Someone who isn't keeping me sick on purpose. Naomi held up the photos. I found the files. The records. The text messages with Simone. I know everything. For a long moment, Julian just stared at her. Then he laughed, a cold, bitter sound. You went through my private files. Do you have any idea how that makes you look? Breaking into my office, stealing confidential documents. Any lawyer would have a field day with that. Any medical board would have a field day with what you've been doing. It's your word against mine. A hysterical wife who broke into her husband's office because she was upset about some routine medical care. There's nothing routine about what you did to me. Julian stepped closer. He wasn't threatening, not physically, but there was an intensity to him now that made Naomi's skin crawl. Think about this carefully, Naomi. You make accusations like this, it destroys both our lives. My career, your reputation. Everything we've built. We haven't built anything. You've built a lie. I've provided for you. Given you a beautiful home, financial security. You've never had to worry about anything. Except my own health. My own body. My choice about having children. You weren't ready for children. You said so yourself when we first got married. That was 5 years ago. People change. And it should have been my choice, not yours. Julian ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking further. This is ridiculous. You're upset, I understand that. But you're blowing this completely out of proportion. The medications I prescribed were for your benefit. My benefit? They were preventing pregnancy. Because pregnancy would have complicated your health issues. What health issues? The ones you invented so you could justify poisoning me? I never poisoned you. His voice rose. Everything I did was within accepted medical practice. Then you won't mind the medical board reviewing your files. All of them. Including the ones about your other patients. Julian went very still. What other patients? The women you experimented on. The ones with the same mysterious symptoms I had. Did you manipulate them too, or was I special? Something dangerous flickered across Julian's face. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. Explain why my medical files read like I was a lab rat instead of your wife. Get out of my way, Naomi. Julian moved toward his office door. She stepped in front of him. No. I said move. Or what? You'll add assault to your list of crimes? They stood face to face, years of false intimacy stripped away to reveal the stranger underneath. Naomi realized she'd never really known this man at all. The person she'd married, the person she'd trusted with everything, had never existed. I want you out of this house, Naomi said quietly. Tonight. Pack a bag and go. Julian laughed. This is my house. My name is on the deed. Both our names are on the deed. It became marital property the day we signed. And I'm not leaving. We'll see what my lawyer says about that. I look forward to it. Because my lawyer is going to have a lot to say about what you've done to me. Julian's expression turned calculating. You really want to do this? Go to war with me? I have resources you can't imagine. I'll bury you in legal fees. Drag this through the courts for years. And at the end of it all, you'll have nothing. I already have nothing. You made sure of that. Naomi stepped aside. Get what you need and go. Unless you'd prefer I call the police right now and have you removed. For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then Julian pushed past her into his office. She heard drawers opening, papers rustling. He emerged 15 minutes later with a briefcase and his laptop. This isn't over, he said. You're right. It's just beginning. Julian left without another word. Naomi stood in the hallway listening to his car pull out of the garage, and finally let herself cry. Naomi didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with Dr. Peterson's medical files and the evidence from Julian's office spread before her, trying to process the magnitude of what had been done to her. Every pill she'd swallowed, every treatment she'd accepted, every moment she'd blamed herself for failing to conceive, all of it orchestrated by the one person who should have protected her. Her phone buzzed constantly. Julian calling and texting. She ignored every message. She had nothing to say to him that wouldn't be better said through a lawyer. At 8 in the morning, she called the only attorney she knew personally, Patricia Coleman. They'd met at a charity fundraiser 2 years ago and stayed in casual contact. Patricia specialized in medical malpractice and had mentioned she'd handled several cases against doctors who'd abused their positions. Naomi? It's been a while. How are you? I need help, Naomi said, her voice hoarse from crying. My husband has been medically abusing me for years, and I need to make sure he never does this to anyone else. 2 hours later, Naomi sat in Patricia's downtown office, the evidence laid out on her conference table. Patricia was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She reviewed every document in silence, her expression growing grimmer with each page. This is one of the worst cases of medical abuse I've seen, Patricia said finally. And I've seen some terrible things. Your husband didn't just betray you as a spouse. He violated every ethical principle of his profession. Can we stop him? We can try. But I need you to understand what you're up against. Julian Harrison comes from money. He has connections in the medical community. He'll hire the best defense lawyers money can buy, and they'll do everything they can to discredit you. I have evidence. Evidence he'll claim was obtained illegally. You broke into his office, Naomi. His lawyers will argue everything you found is inadmissible. Naomi's heart sank. So he gets away with it? I didn't say that. But we need to be strategic. Dr. Peterson's findings are independent evidence obtained through proper medical examination. That's solid. And the medical board investigation will uncover things you couldn't have found on your own. We build the case piece by piece, document by document. What about the other women? The patients he experimented on? Patricia nodded slowly. If we can get them to come forward, that strengthens our case considerably. A pattern of abuse is harder to dismiss than a single incident. But approaching them will be delicate. They may not even know what was done to them. How long will this take? Months. Maybe longer. Medical malpractice cases are complex, and when you add in the personal element, it's going to get ugly, Naomi. Are you prepared for that? Naomi thought of all the mornings she'd woken up exhausted, all the time she'd apologized to Julian for her body's failure to conceive, all the years of her life spent living a lie. I'm prepared, she said. Whatever it takes. Patricia drew up divorce papers that afternoon. They included restraining orders preventing Julian from contacting Naomi directly and from accessing their joint accounts beyond his personal expenses. Naomi signed them with a steady hand. Julian's response came through his attorney 2 days later. He denied all wrongdoing. Claimed Naomi was emotionally unstable, that her accusations were the result of her refusing to take prescribed psychiatric medications. He was countersuing for defamation and demanding she vacate their home immediately. Standard intimidation tactics, Patricia assured her. He's trying to make you back down. Don't. The medical board moved faster than expected. Dr. Peterson's report, combined with their own investigation of Julian's patient records, revealed a disturbing pattern. At least 7 other women had been treated by Julian for unexplained fertility issues. When the board examined their files, they found the same combinations of medications, the same mysterious procedures, the same documentation style that referred to patients as subjects. Julian's medical license was immediately suspended pending a full hearing. His practice was shut down. And suddenly, the press got interested. Prominent gynecologist suspended amid abuse allegations, read the headline in the local paper. Naomi's name was kept confidential, but the story detailed accusations of deliberate medical manipulation and unauthorized experimentation. Julian called her directly, violating the restraining order. Naomi let it go to voicemail. You've destroyed my life, his message said. Everything I've worked for, everything I've built. For what? Because you're angry I didn't want kids right away? You're being childish, Naomi. Vindictive. Call this off now and we can still fix this. We can still have the life we planned. Naomi saved the message and forwarded it to Patricia. More evidence of his complete disconnect from reality. Julian's family reached out next. His mother showed up at Naomi's door, impeccably dressed and coldly furious. You've humiliated this family, Elizabeth Harrison said without preamble. Whatever you think Julian did, it doesn't warrant destroying his career and dragging our name through the mud. He poisoned me, Naomi said flatly. For years. He prevented me from having children because it suited his plans with his mistress. Elizabeth waved a dismissive hand. Men have affairs. It's unfortunate, but it happens. That doesn't give you the right to ruin him. The casual dismissal of Julian's betrayal, the complete lack of concern for what Naomi had endured, told her everything she needed to know about where Julian had learned his values. Your son is a criminal, Naomi said, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. Please leave. We're prepared to offer you a settlement. $2 million if you drop the case and sign a non-disclosure agreement. You'll never have to work again. I don't want your money. $5 million then. That's more than generous. There's no amount of money that will make me stop. Your son needs to face consequences for what he did. To me and to his other victims. Elizabeth's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. We have resources you can't imagine. We'll tie you up in court for years. We'll examine every aspect of your life. Every relationship, every financial decision. We'll make you wish you'd taken the settlement. Then I guess I'll see you in court. After Elizabeth left, Naomi sat on her couch and shook. The reality of what she was up against hit her fully for the first time. Julian's family had money, power, connections. They could make her life hell. already were making her life hell. But giving up meant Julian faced no consequences. Meant the other women he'd hurt got no justice. Meant he could potentially do this again to someone else. Naomi pulled out her phone and opened the voice recording app. If the Harrisons wanted war, she'd document every threat, every intimidation attempt, every illegal thing they tried. She'd beat them at their own game. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. When she opened it, she found a photo of herself leaving Patricia's office, along with a message, "You're being watched. Think carefully about your next move." Naomi's hands trembled, but she saved the message and immediately forwarded it to Patricia. Then she called a locksmith and a security company. If Julian and his family wanted to play dirty, she'd make damn sure she was protected. The next 3 months became a blur of depositions, court filings, and endless legal maneuvering. Julian hired Preston Blackwood, a notoriously aggressive defense attorney known for taking on controversial cases and winning through sheer ruthlessness. Blackwood's strategy became clear immediately: destroy Naomi's credibility by any means necessary. First came the psychiatric evaluation. Blackwood filed a motion claiming Naomi was mentally unstable and her accusations were delusional. Patricia fought back hard, but the judge ordered an independent evaluation to rule out any questions of mental competency. "It's insulting," Naomi told Patricia as they prepared for the evaluation. "He poisons me for years, and I'm the one who has to prove I'm sane? It's a standard tactic in cases like this. They're hoping you'll refuse the evaluation, which would make you look like you have something to hide. Just be honest with the psychiatrist. Answer their questions directly. You'll be fine." Dr. Rachel Foster, the court-appointed psychiatrist, was a stern woman in her 60s who seemed immune to manipulation from either side. She interviewed Naomi for 6 hours over 2 days, asking about her childhood, her marriage, her mental health history. "Have you ever been diagnosed with any psychiatric conditions?" Dr. Foster asked. "No. Julian sometimes suggested I had anxiety or depression, but I never saw anyone else about it. He prescribed medications that he said would help." "The medications Dr. Peterson found in your system?" "Yes." "How did those medications make you feel?" Naomi thought back to the fog she'd lived in for years. "Tired. Disconnected. Like I was moving through life but not really present in it." Dr. Foster made notes. "And when you stopped taking them?" "It was like waking up. Suddenly I could think clearly again. I had energy. I felt like myself for the first time in years." The evaluation report came back 2 weeks later. Dr. Foster found no evidence of mental illness, delusions, or instability. In fact, her report noted that Naomi's symptoms during her marriage were consistent with the effects of the medications Julian had been giving her, and that her improved mental state after discontinuing them supported Dr. Peterson's findings. Blackwood's next tactic was to attack Dr. Peterson's credibility. He filed complaints with the medical board claiming Dr. Peterson had violated patient privacy by discussing Naomi's case publicly. Dr. Peterson had done no such thing, but the accusation alone was designed to make him cautious about testifying. Patricia countered by bringing in additional medical experts who reviewed Naomi's files and reached the same conclusions as Dr. Peterson. The evidence was overwhelming, consistent, and damning. Then Blackwood went after the evidence from Julian's office. He filed a motion to suppress everything Naomi had found, arguing it was obtained through illegal search and seizure. Patricia had expected this and had a counter-argument ready. "Mrs. Harrison lived in that home," Patricia argued in court. "She had every right to access any room in her own residence. The office door was not locked when she entered." This was technically true. Naomi had used a key that was kept in the house. The drawer had been locked, but Patricia argued that once Naomi discovered evidence of a crime, she had both a legal and moral obligation to preserve that evidence. The judge took the motion under advisement, which meant the evidence stayed in play for now. But Naomi could see the calculation in Blackwood's eyes. He was throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick, trying to find any weakness in their case. The harassment escalated. Private investigators followed Naomi everywhere. She'd see the same car outside her yoga classes, the same person in the coffee shop where she met with Patricia. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. The message was clear: "We're watching you." Naomi documented everything. Photos of the investigators, screenshots of suspicious activity on her email and bank accounts, recordings of the threatening phone calls that came at odd hours. Patricia filed for additional restraining orders, but Blackwood claimed his clients had nothing to do with any harassment. "If Mrs. Harrison is experiencing difficulties, perhaps she should examine her own paranoia rather than blaming my clients." The legal bills piled up. Patricia had agreed to work on contingency for the malpractice case, but the divorce proceedings were separate, and those costs were mounting. Julian had frozen their joint accounts, claiming Naomi was draining marital assets. She was living off her small savings from teaching yoga, which wouldn't last much longer. Julian's family made another settlement offer. $10 million, no admission of wrongdoing, complete non-disclosure agreement. "They're scared," Patricia said when Naomi showed her the offer. "That's a significant amount of money. They wouldn't offer it unless they knew we had them. I don't want their money. Naomi, I have to advise you to seriously consider this. $10 million would set you up for life. You could start over anywhere, do anything. And this case could drag on for another year or more. Can you handle that?" Naomi thought about the 7 other women who'd been Julian's patients. Patricia had managed to contact 3 of them. All had suffered similar symptoms. All had been told their fertility issues were their own fault. One had spent $50,000 on IVF treatments that never worked, never knowing Julian had been sabotaging her body the entire time. "What about them?" Naomi asked. "If I take the money and stay quiet, Julian might lose his license, but he'll never face criminal charges. His family will protect him. And those women will never know what was really done to them. That's not your responsibility." "It feels like it is." Patricia studied her for a long moment. "You're a better person than most. And probably more stubborn." "Is that a compliment?" "Take it however you want. But know this. If you turn down this offer, the Harrisons will make the rest of this case as brutal as possible. They've been holding back, relatively speaking. That will end. Then let it end. I'm not backing down." The Harrisons' fury at Naomi's rejection was immediate and vicious. Suddenly, articles started appearing in gossip blogs and social media. Anonymous sources claimed Naomi had been unfaithful, that she'd married Julian for money, that she was an unstable gold digger trying to extort him after their marriage fell apart. Photos appeared online. Naomi having coffee with Owen, the medical consultant working on her case, with captions suggesting an affair. Naomi entering Patricia's office, described as secret meetings with divorce lawyers while still living in the marital home. The comment sections were brutal. Strangers who knew nothing about her case ripped her apart, called her a liar, said she deserved whatever she got. Some even suggested she should be prosecuted for defaming a respected doctor. "This is a coordinated campaign," Patricia said, showing Naomi the pattern of posts. "The Harrisons have hired a PR firm to destroy your reputation. It's witness intimidation and it's illegal." But proving it was another matter. The posts came from anonymous accounts, and the PR firm would never admit to being hired for such purposes. All Patricia could do was file more complaints, more motions, and watch as Naomi's life was dissected by strangers online. Naomi stopped reading the comments, stopped checking social media. She focused on what she could control, showing up for every deposition, answering every question honestly, and refusing to let the Harrisons see her break. The medical board hearing for Julian's license arrived on a cold Tuesday in March. The boardroom was packed with physicians, lawyers, and media. Naomi sat in the gallery beside Patricia, watching as Julian took the stand to defend himself. He was polished, professional, every inch the respected doctor. He denied all wrongdoing, claimed his treatment decisions were within accepted medical practice, suggested that Naomi's accusations stemmed from her disappointment over their failing marriage. "I loved my wife," Julian said, looking directly at the board. "I still do. I never would have done anything to harm her. These allegations are painful and false." Then Dr. Peterson testified. He presented Naomi's medical findings, the drug combinations, the evidence of deliberate manipulation. He was calm, factual, devastating. "In my 30 years of practice," Dr. Peterson concluded, "I have never seen a case of more deliberate, calculated medical abuse. Dr. Harrison used his position and his wife's trust to experiment on her body without her knowledge or consent. This is not a question of medical judgment. This is a crime." The board deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. Julian Harrison's medical license was permanently revoked. He was prohibited from practicing medicine in any capacity, anywhere in the country. Naomi watched Julian's face as the verdict was read. For the first time, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. His medical career, the thing he'd built his entire identity around, was over. But the criminal case was still pending. And the divorce was far from settled. The war was far from over. Owen Chambers had been present at almost every meeting, every deposition, every court appearance. As the medical consultant Patricia had hired to analyze the technical aspects of Julian's abuse, He'd become a fixture in Naomi's daily life. At first, she'd barely noticed him beyond his role in the case. He was professional, thorough, and respectfully distant. But somewhere along the way, his presence had become something she looked forward to. Maybe it was the way he explained complex medical concepts in terms she could understand. Maybe it was how he never treated her like a victim, only as someone who deserved answers. Or maybe it was simply that he was one of the few people in her life who had no agenda beyond helping her case succeed. The toxicology report came back, Owen said during one of their preparation sessions at Patricia's office. He spread several documents across the conference table. The combination of medications Julian prescribed would have kept your progesterone levels artificially suppressed while elevating your cortisol. That's what caused the exhaustion, the mood swings, and prevented ovulation. Naomi studied the charts, trying to make sense of the medical jargon. But he made it look like he was helping me? Exactly. Each medication individually could be justified for various conditions. It's only when you see them together over years that the pattern becomes clear. He was very careful. This took planning and knowledge. How long until my body recovers? Owen's expression softened. You're already improving. Dr. Peterson's latest tests show your hormone levels are normalizing. Give it another few months and you should be back to baseline. Your body is remarkably resilient, Naomi. Something about the way he said her name, with genuine respect and kindness, made her throat tighten. She'd become so used to being treated like a problem to solve or an obstacle to overcome. Owen just treated her like a person. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything you're doing. I know this is just a job for you, but it means a lot. It's not just a job. Owen met her eyes, then seemed to catch himself and looked back at the documents. Cases like this, they remind me why I got into medicine in the first place. To help people. To use science for good instead of harm. You're not practicing anymore? I consult now. After my sister. He paused, seeming to weigh how much to share. She had a doctor who missed a diagnosis. By the time anyone caught it, the cancer had spread. She died 3 years ago. I couldn't stay in clinical practice after that. Every patient became a reminder of how easily things can go wrong when doctors stop seeing people as people. I'm sorry. It's why I take cases like yours. If I can help hold bad doctors accountable, maybe it prevents the next tragedy. Their eyes met and Naomi felt something shift between them. Not attraction exactly. Or maybe it was, but buried under so many other emotions that she couldn't quite name it. Whatever it was, it felt like the first genuine connection she'd had with anyone in years. Patricia walked in before Naomi could respond, her arms full of new filings. The prosecutor's office just called. They're moving forward with criminal charges against Julian. Fraud, assault, practicing medicine with intent to harm. If convicted, he's looking at serious prison time. Naomi should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt exhausted. When? Preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. They'll want you to testify. Of course. Over the next 2 weeks, Owen helped Naomi prepare for her testimony. They spent hours going over medical details, making sure she understood exactly what had been done to her and could explain it clearly to a jury. His patience was infinite, his explanations always clear, never condescending. You're going to be great, he told her the night before the hearing. They were in Patricia's conference room, surrounded by evidence and empty coffee cups. Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do. What if I fall apart on the stand? What if Blackwood tears me apart and I can't hold it together? Then you fall apart and you put yourself back together. You've already survived the worst of this, Naomi. Everything else is just details. His confidence in her felt like a lifeline. For months, she'd been drowning in legal proceedings and emotional turmoil. Owen's steady presence was the first thing that had made her feel like maybe she could actually get through this intact. The preliminary hearing was brutal. Blackwood cross-examined her for 3 hours, trying to trip her up, make her look vengeful or unstable. He brought up the broken lock on Julian's office drawer, suggested she'd planted evidence, implied she'd fabricated her symptoms. Isn't it true, Mrs. Harrison, that you were unhappy in your marriage and looking for a way out? No. Isn't it true that you went to Dr. Peterson specifically seeking a second opinion that would support your narrative? I went to Dr. Peterson because I felt sick and my husband wasn't helping. That's what you do when you need medical care. You see a doctor. A doctor you'd never met before, rather than your husband who's known you for years? My husband was the one making me sick. Blackwood paced in front of her, his expression skeptical. You expect this court to believe that a respected physician, a man with years of training and an impeccable reputation, would deliberately harm his own wife? Naomi looked directly at the judge. Yes, because that's exactly what happened. And I have the medical evidence to prove it. When she finally left the stand, Naomi's legs were shaking. Owen was waiting outside the courtroom. He didn't say anything, just handed her a bottle of water and let her compose herself. You did great, he said finally. I thought I was going to throw up. But you didn't. You held it together and told your story. That's what matters. The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence for the criminal case to proceed to trial. Julian was released on bail but ordered to surrender his passport. He couldn't practice medicine, couldn't leave the state, couldn't contact Naomi or any potential witnesses. For the first time, Naomi felt like maybe she was winning. Not just the legal battle but the war to reclaim her life and her identity. Owen took her to dinner that night. Nothing fancy, just a quiet restaurant where they could decompress after months of intensity. They talked about everything except the case. Owen told her about his photography hobby, his love of hiking, his terrible attempts at learning guitar. Naomi found herself laughing for the first time in months. I'd forgotten what this felt like, she admitted. Just being normal. Having a conversation that isn't about medical abuse or legal strategy. You deserve normal, Owen said. You deserve a lot of things you haven't had. There was something in his eyes that made Naomi's heart skip. But she pushed it down. She couldn't think about that now. Not while her life was still a legal battlefield. Not while she was still technically married to Julian, even if only on paper. Thank you, she said instead, for being here. For helping me through this. Anytime. And he meant it. Over the following months as the case dragged on, Owen remained a constant presence. He never pushed for more than friendship, never made Naomi feel like she owed him anything. He was just there, steady and solid, whenever she needed someone to remind her that good people still existed. The medical board's decision to permanently revoke Julian's license made national news. Prominent gynecologist loses license after wife's abuse allegations ran in major newspapers. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, medical malfeasance. Reporters camped outside Naomi's house trying to get interviews. She declined them all. Julian's private practice, already shuttered during the investigation, was now permanently closed. His business partner, Simone Cartwright, found herself under investigation as well. The pharmaceutical company she worked for launched an internal review of her sales practices, particularly focusing on her relationship with Julian and whether she'd been complicit in his schemes. It took investigators 3 weeks to uncover the full extent of their conspiracy. Simone had been providing Julian with medications through unofficial channels, allowing him to bypass normal prescription protocols. Some of the drugs she'd supplied weren't even approved for the uses Julian had been employing them for. In exchange, Julian had been prescribing her company's products to his patients, even when cheaper or more effective alternatives existed. The pharmaceutical company fired Simone immediately. 2 days later, she was arrested for fraud and conspiracy. Her mugshot appeared in the same newspapers that had once featured her at charity galas and medical conferences. Naomi felt no satisfaction watching Simone's life implode. There was only a hollow sense of justice being served, too late to undo the damage already done. The 3 other victims of Julian's abuse that Patricia had contacted decided to come forward publicly. They filed a joint lawsuit against Julian and his former practice. Their testimonies were remarkably similar to Naomi's: years of unexplained symptoms, treatments that never quite worked, a doctor who seemed caring but somehow always kept them sick enough to keep coming back. One woman, Teresa, had been Julian's patient for 7 years. She'd spent over $100,000 on fertility treatments, never knowing Julian was actively preventing those treatments from working. She'd finally given up on having children, accepting what she thought was her body's failure, only to conceive naturally 3 months after switching to a new gynecologist. Another victim, Kimberly, had developed severe depression from the hormone manipulations. She'd been hospitalized twice, put on psychiatric medications, told her problems were all in her head. It had destroyed her marriage and nearly cost her her job. The third, Angela, was only 26. She'd been Julian's patient since she was 19, seeking treatment for irregular periods. 7 years of medication that made her chronically ill, that stole her 20s, that left her feeling broken and wrong. Their stories made Naomi's look tame by comparison. Julian hadn't just manipulated one wife. He'd been systematically abusing vulnerable women for years, using his position of trust to experiment on them like they were test subjects instead of human beings. The criminal trial was set for September, 9 months after Naomi had first walked into Dr. Peterson's office. The intervening time was a strange limbo. Naomi was legally separated from Julian but not yet divorced. Her house was still half his, her life still tangled with his in 1,000 legal and financial ways. Julian tried to contact her dozens of times, always through intermediaries since the restraining order prevented direct communication. His lawyer would call Patricia with settlement offers, apologies, explanations. Julian wanted to work things out. He claimed he still loved her, that everything he'd done was a misguided attempt to protect her. Naomi ignored it all. She knew manipulation when she heard it now. The harassment from Julian's family intensified as the trial date approached. Private investigators became more aggressive. Naomi's mail was tampered with. Someone broke into her car, though nothing was stolen. It was all designed to frighten her, to make her feel unsafe, to pressure her into dropping the case. Instead, Naomi hired security. She installed cameras around her property. She varied her routines and routes. She refused to be intimidated into silence. Her yoga students were remarkably supportive. Word had gotten around about what she was going through, though Naomi never discussed it directly. Her classes became a refuge, an hour where she could focus on breath and movement instead of legal battles and criminal trials. One evening after class, several of her regular students approached her. "We just want you to know we're proud of you," one woman said. "What you're doing standing up to him. It matters." Another added, "My sister had a doctor who dismissed her symptoms for years. Turned out she had a tumor. By the time anyone took her seriously, it was almost too late. Doctors who abuse their power need to be stopped." The simple solidarity meant more to Naomi than any legal victory could. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who'd ever been dismissed, manipulated, or harmed by someone they trusted with their care. The prosecutor's office continued building their case. They'd subpoenaed years of Julian's records, interviewed dozens of his former patients, consulted with medical experts across the country. The evidence was overwhelming. But Blackwood was good at his job. He filed motion after motion, trying to get evidence excluded, trying to delay the trial, trying to create reasonable doubt before they even got to court. He gave interviews claiming Julian was the victim of a witch hunt by vindictive women who couldn't accept that sometimes medical treatments don't work. "Dr. Harrison is a brilliant physician who dedicated his life to helping women," Blackwood said in one televised interview. "He's being crucified because our society has become so quick to believe accusations without examining evidence. This is what happens when emotion replaces reason in our justice system." The comment sections of those interviews filled with people defending Julian, attacking Naomi and the other women, claiming it was all a plot to destroy a successful man. The misogyny was breathtaking. But for every hateful comment, there were dozens more from people who believed them, who shared their own stories of medical abuse, who thanked Naomi for speaking out. She received letters from women all over the country, some detailing experiences that made her stomach turn. The medical abuse epidemic was far larger than she'd imagined. Julian wasn't an isolated case. He was one of many doctors who'd found ways to exploit their patients, and the system made it far too easy to get away with it. Naomi started a blog, sharing her story anonymously at first. She wrote about what it felt like to discover your life was a lie, to realize the person you trusted most was your abuser, to fight back against a system designed to protect powerful men. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within weeks, her blog had thousands of followers. Other victims reached out, sharing their stories, forming a community of survivors. Naomi found purpose in the connections, in knowing her pain was helping others feel less alone. Owen helped her maintain the technical side of the blog, ensuring her identity stayed protected until she was ready to go public. He never asked for anything in return, never made her feel obligated. He was just there, supporting her however she needed. "You're doing something important," he told her one evening as they reviewed analytics showing how widely her posts were being shared. "You're changing the conversation around medical consent and patient rights." "I'm just telling the truth. That's exactly why it matters." 2 weeks before the trial, Julian's family made one final settlement offer. $20 million. All charges dropped. Complete confidentiality. "They're terrified," Patricia said. "This is desperation money." "Good," Naomi replied. "Let them be terrified. I want them to understand what it feels like to have no control, no power, no way out. I want them to feel 1/10 of what Julian made me feel." She rejected the offer without hesitation. While the legal machinery ground forward toward trial, Naomi began the harder work of rebuilding herself. The physical healing was progressing well. Dr. Peterson's continued monitoring showed her hormone levels were normal, her body was healthy. She'd regained the weight she'd lost, her energy had returned, and for the first time in years she felt present in her own skin. The emotional healing was more complex. Naomi started therapy with a counselor who specialized in abuse recovery. Session by session, she untangled the ways Julian had manipulated her, the patterns of control she'd missed, the red flags she'd ignored because she wanted to believe in their marriage. "You couldn't have known," Dr. Lin told her during one session. "Abusers are experts at hiding their true nature, especially when they have medical expertise to back up their lies. I should have questioned more. Should have gotten a second opinion years ago. You trusted your husband. That's not a failing, Naomi. That's what marriage is supposed to be built on. He's the one who violated that trust." Slowly, Naomi began to forgive herself. Not for being victimized, she'd never been at fault for that, but for the time she'd lost, the years she'd spent blaming herself for manufactured problems. She started to see herself not as Julian's victim, but as a survivor who'd fought back. Her blog continued to grow. She'd moved beyond anonymity, posting under her real name and photo. The response was incredible. Journalists requested interviews. Patient advocacy groups invited her to speak at conferences. Medical schools asked her to present to students about the importance of patient autonomy and informed consent. Naomi discovered she was good at public speaking. Years of teaching yoga had made her comfortable in front of groups, and her story resonated with audiences. She spoke plainly without drama or exaggeration, letting the facts speak for themselves. The impact was powerful. "You have a gift for this," Owen told her after watching her deliver a keynote address at a medical ethics conference. "You make people understand not just what happened, but why it matters. I just don't want anyone else to go through what I did. You're making sure they won't. Every medical student who hears your story will remember it. Every doctor who learns what happened will think twice before dismissing a patient's concerns." Their friendship had deepened over the months, becoming something neither of them quite acknowledged but both felt. Owen was careful not to push boundaries, aware that Naomi was still processing trauma and fighting legal battles. But there was an ease between them, a compatibility that felt natural and unforced. Sometimes, after particularly difficult days, they'd grab dinner together. Just as friends, they both insisted. They'd talk about books, movies, anything but the case. Owen made her laugh. Naomi made him think. It was comfortable in a way she hadn't experienced with anyone in years. "My divorce should be final in a few months," Naomi mentioned one evening. They were sitting in a coffee shop, reviewing documents for an upcoming deposition. "Once the criminal trial concludes and the assets are divided." Owen looked up from the papers. "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved mostly. That part of my life is over. I'm ready to close the door on it completely." "What comes after?" Naomi considered the question. 6 months ago she would have had no answer. Her entire identity had been wrapped up in being Julian's wife, in trying to fix her supposedly broken body, in living the life he designed for her. Now she had options. "I want to keep doing advocacy work," she said. "Maybe start a foundation to help other victims of medical abuse. Provide resources, legal support, connect people with ethical doctors. There's such a need for it." "That's a great goal. What about you? What comes after this case?" Owen shrugged. "Another case, I suppose. Another chance to help someone." "Do you ever think about going back to clinical practice?" "Sometimes. But I think I'm doing more good where I am. I can help dozens of cases as a consultant, reach more people than I ever could seeing patients one at a time. Still, it must be hard. Walking away from what you trained for. Life's full of hard choices. The key is making sure they're the right ones." He met her eyes. "Like you did. Walking away from Julian, fighting back instead of taking the easy money. Those were hard choices. They were the only choices. Not everyone would see it that way. Most people would have taken the settlement and tried to move on. I couldn't live with myself if I did that. Those other women deserved justice too." Owen smiled. "That's what makes you remarkable." The trial date arrived like a storm after a long, tense calm. Naomi had been preparing for months, but nothing could fully ready her for the reality of walking into that courtroom and facing Julian across the aisle. He looked diminished somehow. Still handsome, still put together in his expensive suit, but there was a hollowness to him now. His medical career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His family's money could buy the best lawyers, but it couldn't buy back what he'd lost. For the first time, Naomi felt something like pity for him. Not enough to change her mind, not enough to wish she'd done anything differently, but enough to recognize that his life was over too in its own way. The future he'd planned with Simone was gone. The career he'd built was finished. He'd destroyed himself trying to control her. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Naomi testified for 2 full days, walking the jury through every detail of her medical history, every medication Julian had prescribed, every symptom she'd experienced. Blackwood cross-examined her aggressively, but she held firm. She'd lived this story. No lawyer could shake her from the truth of it. Teresa, Kimberly, and Angela testified as well. Their stories were heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure. By the time the prosecution rested their case, the jury looked shell-shocked by the scope of Julian's abuse. The defense tried to paint Julian as a dedicated doctor who'd made some questionable choices but had never intended harm. They brought in medical experts who testified that his treatment decisions could be justified, that outcomes weren't always predictable, that sometimes doctors made mistakes. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The documented patterns, the hidden files, the communications with Simone, the financial motives. It all added up to a picture of deliberate, calculated abuse. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Julian showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He simply stared straight ahead, his expression blank. But Naomi saw his hands clench on the defense table, the only sign of the rage and fear he must have felt. Sentencing would come later, but the prosecutor expected substantial prison time. Julian was looking at 10 to 15 years, possibly more. His billionaire status, his privileged background, none of it had been enough to save him in the end. Naomi left the courthouse surrounded by supporters, camera flashes going off everywhere. Reporters shouted questions she didn't answer. She'd make a statement later, through Patricia. Right now, she just wanted to process what had happened. Justice. After a year of fighting, she'd gotten justice. It didn't erase what had been done to her. It didn't give her back the years she'd lost. But it meant Julian would face consequences. It meant other women were safer. It meant something. The sentencing hearing took place 3 weeks after the verdict, on a gray October morning that matched Naomi's somber mood. She thought she would feel triumphant when this day came, but instead she just felt tired. Tired of courtrooms and lawyers and reliving the worst period of her life over and over. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Barbara Hartley, had reviewed every piece of evidence, every testimony, every legal brief. Her reputation was for fairness but also for holding criminals accountable, especially those who abused positions of trust. Julian's lawyers had filed for leniency, arguing that he'd already lost his career and his reputation, that prison time would serve no additional purpose. They presented character witnesses. His mother testified tearfully about what a good son he'd been. His father spoke about the family legacy Julian had destroyed. None of it moved Judge Hartley. "Dr. Harrison," she said, looking directly at Julian, "you held a position of profound trust. Patients came to you in their most vulnerable moments, seeking care and healing. Instead, you exploited that vulnerability for personal gain and to satisfy your own agenda. You didn't just betray your wife. You betrayed every principle of medical ethics, every oath you took as a physician, and the trust of every patient who entered your office." Julian's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Judge Hartley continued. "The evidence presented in this case shows a pattern of deliberate, calculated abuse spanning years. You used your medical knowledge not to heal but to harm. You manipulated multiple women, stealing their health, their fertility, and years of their lives. The fact that you did this while maintaining a facade of care and concern makes your crimes even more reprehensible." She paused, reviewing her notes. "The prosecution has recommended 15 years. The defense has asked for 3. I find both recommendations insufficient to address the severity of these crimes." Naomi's breath caught. "Insufficient? Dr. Julian Harrison, I hereby sentence you to 20 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 12 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution to your victims totaling $8 million, to be distributed equally among those who have come forward. You are permanently barred from practicing medicine or working in any healthcare-related field." 20 years. Naomi felt Patricia squeeze her hand. Around her, the other victims began to cry quietly. In the front row, Julian's mother let out a strangled sob. Julian finally showed emotion, his face going pale. 20 years meant he'd be in his late 50s when he got out. His entire life, everything he'd built, was truly over. "Before I conclude," Judge Hartley said, "I want to address the victims directly. Mrs. Harrison, Ms. Chin, Ms. Thompson, Ms. Rivera, your courage in coming forward has likely prevented countless other women from suffering similar abuse. You refused to be silenced or intimidated. You demanded accountability in a system that too often protects perpetrators. You should be proud of what you've accomplished here. The hearing ended and Julian was led away in handcuffs. He looked back once at his family, then at Naomi. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. Whatever he saw in her face made him turn away first. Outside the courthouse, Patricia organized a brief press conference. The four women stood together, a united front. Today justice was served, Naomi said into the microphones. Not just for us, but for every patient who's ever been betrayed by a doctor they trusted. Medical abuse is more common than most people realize. Doctors who exploit their positions of power, who prioritize their own interests over patient welfare, who manipulate and harm the people who come to them for help. It needs to stop. Teresa spoke next, her voice strong despite the tears on her face. I spent 7 years believing my body was broken. I spent $100,000 trying to have a baby, never knowing the doctor I trusted was preventing it from happening. I lost my marriage because the strain was too much. But I'm standing here today to say that we won't be silent anymore. We won't let shame or fear keep us from speaking the truth. The press conference lasted 30 minutes. Reporters asked about the other cases, about whether more victims might come forward, about what changes they wanted to see in medical oversight. Naomi answered thoughtfully, pushing for stronger patient protections, better oversight of physicians, and mandatory reporting requirements for suspected medical abuse. That evening, exhausted but finally free, Naomi returned to her house. The divorce had been finalized the week before. Julian had been forced to sign over his half of the property as part of his restitution payments. The house was entirely hers now, but she'd already decided to sell it. Too many memories, too much pain contained in these walls. She'd found a smaller place across town, a sunny apartment with a view of the park. A fresh start in a space that had never known Julian's presence. She'd move next month, after the media attention died down. Owen had sent her a text earlier, proud of you. Dinner to celebrate? Naomi smiled and replied, yes. But somewhere quiet. I've had enough spotlight for one day. They met at a small bistro Owen knew, tucked away in a neighborhood she'd never visited before. He was already there when she arrived, standing to greet her with a warm smile. You did it, he said simply. We did it. I couldn't have gotten through this without you. You would have found a way. You're stronger than you know. They ordered wine and food, letting the conversation drift to normal topics. Owen told her about a new consulting case he'd taken, one involving hospital protocol violations but nothing as sinister as Julian's crimes. Naomi described her plans for the patient advocacy foundation she wanted to start. I've been thinking about the name, she said. Something that emphasizes patient autonomy and informed consent. Maybe, the Patient Voice Foundation, or something like that. I like it. And I'd like to help if you need consultants or medical advisors. I was hoping you'd say that. As the evening wore on, Naomi felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year. The trial was over. Julian was in prison. She had her health back, her life back, her future back. What are you thinking about? Owen asked, noticing her quiet smile. How strange it is that the worst thing that ever happened to me led to this. To finding purpose, to helping other people, to becoming someone I actually like. I don't wish any of it had happened, but I'm not the same person I was a year ago. I'm stronger now. More sure of myself. You always had that strength. Julian just made you forget it was there. Maybe. But I found it again. And this time, I'm not letting anyone take it away. They lingered over dessert, neither quite ready for the evening to end. As they walked to their cars, Owen stopped, seeming to wrestle with something. Naomi, I know the timing might not be perfect and you've been through so much, but I'd like to take you to dinner again. Not as colleagues. Not as friends working on a case. Just as us. If you're interested. Naomi looked at this man who'd been beside her through the hardest year of her life, who'd never asked for anything, who'd supported her without agenda or expectation. She thought about how ready she was to start fresh, to build a life based on genuine connection instead of manipulation. I'd like that, she said. But Owen, I need to be honest. I'm still figuring out who I am outside of everything that happened. I'm not ready for anything serious or complicated. I need time. I understand. I'm not going anywhere. Whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. The simple acceptance, the lack of pressure, made something tight in Naomi's chest finally loosen. This was what healthy looked like. This was what respect felt like. And maybe when she was ready, this was what love could feel like too. But for now, she was content to take it slow, to focus on healing and building her foundation and helping other women find their voices. Romance could wait. Her life was finally her own again, and she was in no hurry to share it until she was completely certain she wanted to. 1 year later, Naomi stood backstage at a medical ethics conference in Chicago, reviewing her notes for what felt like the 100th time. Public speaking had become routine by now. She'd given dozens of talks over the past year, but she still felt butterflies before each one. The Patient Voice Foundation had launched 6 months earlier, funded partly by her settlement money and partly by donations from supporters who'd followed her story. The foundation provided resources for victims of medical abuse, legal referrals, connections to ethical healthcare providers, support groups, and educational materials about patient rights. The response had been overwhelming. In just 6 months, they'd helped over 300 people navigate situations involving suspected medical abuse. Some cases were as severe as Naomi's. Others involved more subtle forms of manipulation, doctors dismissing symptoms, refusing to provide complete information about treatments, or pressuring patients into unnecessary procedures. Each story reinforced why this work mattered. The medical system gave tremendous power to physicians, and while most used it responsibly, those who didn't could cause devastating harm. Patients needed advocates. They needed to know they had the right to question, to seek second opinions, to demand full disclosure about their care. 5 minutes, Ms. Harrison, the conference coordinator said, popping her head backstage. Naomi nodded, taking a deep breath. This was a big audience, over 1,000 medical students, residents, and practicing physicians. Her message needed to land. She walked onto the stage to polite applause, taking her place behind the podium. The lights made it hard to see individual faces, but she could feel the attention of the crowd focused on her. "My name is Naomi Harrison," she began, "and 5 years ago, I married a man who spent the next several years poisoning me. Not with a single dramatic dose of something lethal. With prescriptions. With procedures. With medical care that looked legitimate on the surface but was designed to keep me sick, dependent, and unable to conceive children." The room was silent. She had their attention. My husband was a gynecologist. A respected physician from a wealthy family with connections throughout the medical community. When I told people something was wrong, when I said I didn't feel well, everyone including me assumed my body was the problem. Because doctors know best, right? We trust them. We have to trust them. Naomi clicked to the next slide, showing statistics on medical abuse and patient harm. But what happens when that trust is betrayed? What happens when the person who's supposed to heal you is actually harming you? For me, it took over 3 years to discover the truth. 3 years of my life stolen, my health compromised, my choices taken away. She walked the audience through her story, not dwelling on the sensational details but focusing on the systemic issues that had allowed Julian's abuse to continue unchecked. The lack of oversight. The assumption that doctors are always acting in good faith. The difficulty patients face questioning medical authority. "I'm not here to make you paranoid about your colleagues," she said. "The vast majority of physicians are ethical, caring professionals who genuinely want to help their patients. But the system needs to make it easier to catch the ones who aren't. We need better protocols for second opinions, stronger protection for whistleblowers, and we need to listen when patients say something doesn't feel right." She concluded with information about the foundation and resources for both patients and medical providers who suspected abuse. The applause when she finished was thunderous, sustained, genuine. During the Q&A session, medical students asked thoughtful questions about how to balance trust with vigilance, how to recognize warning signs of colleague misconduct, how to support patients who might be experiencing abuse. Naomi answered each one carefully, emphasizing education and empowerment over fear. After the session, dozens of people approached her. Some shared their own experiences with medical trauma. Others thanked her for speaking out. Several medical students said her talk had changed how they thought about patient autonomy and informed consent. "You probably saved lives today," one young resident said. "I'll never dismiss a patient's concerns the same way again." Those words made everything worthwhile. The year of trauma, the legal battles, the public exposure, all of it had purpose if it prevented even one person from suffering what she'd suffered. Owen was waiting outside the conference hall, leaning against a wall with his usual patient smile. They'd been dating for 8 months now, taking things slow but steady. He'd kept his promise about not pushing, letting Naomi set the pace, supporting her without trying to control or fix her. It was different from anything she'd experienced with Julian. There were no games, no manipulation, no hidden agendas. Just two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, building something real and honest. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Good. Really good. I think they actually heard me. Of course they did. You're impossible not to hear when you're speaking truth. They walked to a nearby cafe, hands linked comfortably. Naomi had learned to appreciate these small moments of normalcy, the quiet afternoons that weren't consumed by legal proceedings or media interviews. Life had settled into something peaceful, something she'd built on her own terms. I got an interesting call this morning, Owen said as they settled at a corner table. A hospital in Boston wants to bring me on as a full-time consultant, developing protocols for identifying and preventing medical abuse. It's a big position, lots of influence to make systematic changes. That's amazing. You'd be perfect for it. It would mean relocating. Moving across the country. Naomi's heart sank slightly, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. That's a big opportunity. You should take it. Owen reached across the table, taking her hand. I wanted to talk to you about it first. See how you'd feel about the idea. Of Boston. Of potentially coming with me. Owen, we've only been together 8 months. I know. And I'm not proposing or asking you to upend your life for me. The foundation is here, your work is here. I get that. But I also know that you've talked about wanting to expand the foundation nationally, maybe open regional offices. Boston could be one of them. Naomi considered this. She had been thinking about expansion. The need for patient advocacy resources existed everywhere, not just in her city. A Boston office could serve the entire Northeast. And while 8 months wasn't long, it was long enough to know that Owen was solid, trustworthy, someone who enhanced her life without trying to define it. I'd need to think about it. Talk to my board, figure out logistics. This isn't something I can decide on impulse. I wouldn't expect you to. Take all the time you need. The job doesn't start for 3 months anyway. I just wanted you to know that wherever I go, I'd like you to be part of that future. If you want to be. The offer was genuine, free of pressure or manipulation. That was the difference. Owen wanted her to come because he valued her, not because he needed to control her. If she said no, he'd accept it and they'd figure out the distance. If she said yes, it would be her choice, made for her own reasons. I'll think about it, Naomi promised. They spent the rest of the afternoon discussing possibilities, talking through pros and cons, dreaming about what a Boston chapter of the foundation might look like. It felt collaborative, exciting, like they were building something together rather than one person dragging the other along. That evening, Naomi sat in her apartment, looking out at the park view she'd come to love. Her life was good now. Peaceful. Full of purpose and genuine connections. She'd rebuilt herself from the ground up, and she was proud of what she'd created. Julian was in prison, serving his 20-year sentence. She never thought about him anymore unless she had to for foundation work or occasionally when his name came up in news articles about medical abuse cases. He was part of her past, a chapter closed and finished. Simone was serving her own sentence, 5 years for conspiracy and fraud. The pharmaceutical company had settled multiple lawsuits and implemented new oversight procedures for their sales representatives. Small victories but important ones. The other victims, Teresa, Kimberly, and Angela, had all moved forward with their lives too. Teresa had remarried and adopted 2 children. Kimberly had gone back to school to become a patient advocate herself. Angela was traveling the world, reclaiming the years that had been stolen from her. They stayed in touch, their shared experience creating a bond that distance couldn't break. They celebrated each other's victories and supported each other through difficult moments. They were survivors and they'd found strength in their survival. Naomi's phone buzzed with a text from Owen. No pressure, but I made a list of great coffee shops in Boston. You know, just in case. She smiled. Boston could be good. A fresh start in a city with no painful memories, doing work she loved, with a man who respected her completely. It wasn't running away. It was moving forward. She'd learned that healing wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about integrating those experiences into who you became after them. She was stronger now, wiser, more compassionate. Julian had tried to break her, but instead she'd broken free and built something beautiful from the pieces. 3 months later, Naomi stood in a bright, sun-filled office space in downtown Boston. The sign on the door read, The Patient Voice Foundation, Northeast Regional Office. Owen stood beside her, helping arrange furniture while her assistant, hired just last week, set up computer systems. It's perfect, Naomi said, looking around at what they'd created. Room for support groups, private consultation areas, and space to grow. You did it. Built something from nothing. We did it. I couldn't have managed the expansion without your help. Owen wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Partners? Partners. The office would officially open next month with a launch event featuring speakers from across the patient advocacy community. Media interest was already high. The foundation's work was making waves, inspiring similar organizations in other cities, pushing for policy changes at state and national levels. But for Naomi, the real victory was simpler. It was the emails from women who'd found the courage to question their doctors because of her story. The medical students who'd changed how they practiced because of her talks. The families who'd gotten answers and justice because the foundation connected them with resources. Every life touched, every person helped, was a repudiation of what Julian had tried to do to her. He'd wanted to control her, to keep her weak and dependent. Instead, she'd become strong, independent, and dedicated to helping others find their own strength. That evening, Naomi and Owen had dinner at a restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. The city lights reflected on the water, creating a shimmering path across the darkness. "Happy?" Owen asked. Naomi considered the question. A year ago, even 6 months ago, she wouldn't have been sure how to answer. Happiness had seemed like something that existed for other people, not for her. But now, "Yes," she said simply. "I really am." And she was. Not because everything was perfect, not because she'd forgotten the past, but because she'd built a life she was proud of. A life based on her choices, her values, her determination to turn trauma into purpose. Julian had taken years from her. But she'd taken those years back by making sure no one else would suffer the same way. She'd found justice, found purpose, and found herself in the process. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities she got to choose for herself. And that, more than any court victory or public vindication, was the truest form of freedom.